Well, however you slice this was a bold move by Nancy Pelosi, the House Speaker. We know she cares deeply about human rights issues in China, but we also know that President Biden, the White House and the US military didn't think this was the right time. It was a bad idea for her to travel to Taiwan right now, given escalating tensions between China and the US and that warning from President Xi himself about her playing with fire if she made the visit. But having leaked that she planned to go, it would have looked weak for Pelosi to change her plans. But make no mistake, this will definitely up the ante between the two nations. However much people like the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, try to persuade Beijing not to overreact to her visit. But in the last half hour or so, the Taiwanese Defense Ministry has said that Chinese planes have entered its airspace. So clearly, China is not listening to the US. The details of her trip were kept secret, but there was no mistaking the United States aircraft bearing Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the US House and one of the most powerful people in Washington, D.C., as it touched down in Taiwan. The most senior US official to visit the self-governing island in 25 years, which is why China is so irate. It sees Taiwan as its territory and views the visit by Pelosi, so senior she's second in line to the US presidency, as open support for its formal independence. Pictures posted on Chinese social media today showed the Communist Party's response. Tanks barreling down a beach in the city of Xiamen, across the water from Taiwan, after China's President Xi Jinping threatened strong and resolute measures if Pelosi dared go ahead with the trip. But Xi did anyway, and upon touchdown immediately released a statement underlining America's unwavering commitment to supporting Taiwan's vibrant democracy, at a time, she said, when America's solidarity with the 23 million people of Taiwan is more important today than ever, as the world faces a choice between autocracy and democracy. Pelosi was given a rock star welcome, with crowds chasing her entourage for a glimpse of the US Speaker as she arrived at her hotel in Taipei. Ahead of a meeting tomorrow with Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen, the capital's tallest building was lit up with words of welcome for Pelosi and a heart to symbolise the two countries' friendship. Precisely the kind of open display of affection that will so anger Beijing, whose relationship with Washington was already particularly strained, despite a lengthy call between Xi and President Biden last week, in which the Chinese president warned America against playing with fire over Taiwan. And in response, Biden reaffirmed the US commitment to its one China policy, a form of words in which it recognises the People's Republic of China as the sole legal government and acknowledges Beijing's position that Taiwan is part of China. That so-called strategic ambiguity is how it's been for the past 40 years, but a more belligerent tone from President Xi about his desire for reunification has Washington nervous about his next move. That same tone was evident today when the Chinese Foreign Ministry said America's provocation had forced it to act.
美台勾连挑衅在先。
In the face of the US's unscrupulous behaviour in defiance of China's repeated and serious complaints, any countermeasures China is taking will be justified and necessary. China has already upped its military presence in the Taiwan Straits, but as of tonight, it said it plans additional air and sea exercises around the island, including long-range artillery fire. That doesn't necessarily mean it plans to immediately invade Taiwan, but the worry is it's an escalation that could push Beijing closer to the brink, where one step or misstep could lead to an all-out war.
Well, just a few minutes ago, I spoke to Wen T-sung in Taipei. He's an expert on the relationship between the US, China and Taiwan. I started by asking him if the trip is a reckless one.
Well, I think high-profile visits like that certainly is not without risks. But I think Pelosi has already done a lot in terms of trying to think about the pros and cons involved, and in terms of trying to mitigate some of the preventable risks. So, for example, before she visits, she told members of the media that her visit is about showing U.S. support for Taiwan's democratic values. But as to the much more sensitive issue of sovereignty or independence or not, that's an issue for the Taiwanese people to decide. So in that sense, Pelosi is making a statement about values rather than taking a position on China's red line, e.g. sovereignty and territorial integrity issues.
But it's interesting because the White House privately doesn't back this trip. President Biden didn't want it to happen.
Yeah, I mean, that's, of course, anyone's guess why Biden would come up with the position. And certainly Biden didn't say he personally disapproved. He only said that members of his defense and military teams show a lot of security concern about it. So that may not necessarily mean that Biden personally disapproves it. If anything, Biden, by publicly showing some indirect concerns that may or may not represent himself, may actually go some way in terms of giving China an off-ramp. So if China, you're not happy with Pelosi's visit, it's Pelosi's personal decision, and it doesn't represent any change in U.S. policy.
Well, China is more than a little not happy, though. It's furious, isn't it?
I think so. And they've definitely put out quite a number of sanctions in place already, major diplomatic condemnation. You expect that. And right now, there are reports that they are going to start live fire military exercise in the waters near Taiwan. And some of the designated areas of the exercise may actually enter or overlap with what Taiwan calls its own territorial waters. So I think that's one way for China to signal displeasure, that they do not recognize Taiwan's claim to territorial waters.
Could we see military escalation of some sort? Because that will be alarming for many people.
When it comes to high-stakes military activity like that in proximity, there's always going to carry the risk of, if nothing else, accidental escalation for sure. So I think that's one major risk that everyone will be keeping a close watch on. At this point, all we can really say is that there doesn't seem to be great strategic reason for either U.S. or China to really want to make things go out of control. For U.S., obviously, it's got Ukraine issue to worry about, let alone everything else. For China, precisely because China has this power transition coming up in about 3 months' time, when President Xi is shooting for his third term. And if you read everything coming out of China for the last few months, every single Politburo meetings, every major work conference, they say this thing: stability is paramount. So that seems to suggest that even for China, it wouldn't really want to seriously shoot for anything that would get close to escalation of war, because nothing unleashes instability and uncontrollable risks like war.
Okay, Wen T-sung, thank you very much for joining us.